So this is Cloudflare CEO from a year ago, which I think is really interesting because for those that aren't following, there's a bunch of people that have come out talking about how they feel like they're being extorted from Cloudflare. And there's a bunch of Twitter chatter about it. So whether it's real or not, this is a CEO call out from a year ago. And if you remember, also during this time, there was that one girl who recorded herself getting fired from Cloudflare. It was 8 minutes of it was painful to watch. For those that didn't actually listen to the article or read it yourself, effectively somebody posted this article where they showed the emails of them getting these really intense messages from Cloudflare that went something along the lines of like, hey, you're kind of hurting our networks. We need to talk immediately. So then they would go and they'd meet with them, and they wouldn't meet with devs. They would actually meet with sales team. And the sales team just tried to sell them on enterprise, and they're like, okay, this is weird. They're already on a business plan, and it meets all their needs. And then the next couple days, it's like, hey, if you don't do this, we're shutting down your accounts. You need to meet with the trust and safety team. They go to the trust and safety team, and what happens? It's the sales team again, and there's no trust and safety. Turns out trust and safety did not exist. It's just, yet again, the sales team saying that you have effectively one day to go and use enterprise, and if you don't use enterprise and pay 1 year in advance at $10,000 a month, so $120,000 up front, too bad, we're turning off your account. And so it's like, it sounds pretty crappy. It sounds like really crappy sales tactics. And so this is a statement from a year ago, which I think is really interesting, and I think this puts a lot of things into perspective. Although we've won a third of the Fortune 500 customers, if we're honest with ourselves, we saw a lot of our success with our enterprise customers because our products were so good and solved real problems that every big company faces. That allowed many on our sales team to succeed largely by taking orders. When the fish are jumping right in the boat, you don't need to be very good fishermen. But the risk of mixing watering metaphors, as the tide goes out, you get a clear view who's not wearing shorts. The macroeconomic environment has gotten harder, and we're seeing that some of our team aren't dressed for work. Digging in with Mark, we've identified more than 100 people on our sales team who have consistently missed expectations. Simply put, a significant percentage of our sales force has been repeatedly underperforming based on measurable performance targets and critical KPIs. That's obviously a problem. So this is where things get interesting. I think this is where we're seeing a lot of this. This is, if I were a guessing man and I were to put this all together, because obviously I have no concrete information here. This is just me trying to draw some. I'm turning into Charlie Day from Always Sunny at Philadelphia. Effectively, a year ago, the CEO realized that people aren't jumping in anymore. They have a pretty absurd evaluation. If you look at their stock, they have a pretty dang absurd evaluation. Right now, they're sitting at $24.8 billion, but their quarterly revenue, total gross revenue, was less than $400 million. That means they're making like what, $1.06 per year. And that's in gross revenue. Their net income is still negative. And so for them to grow even to something remotely close of not having 100x PE ratio, which is pretty outrageous, because I think even Nvidia, which is like the bell of the ball right now, even their PE ratio is less than Cloudflare, which is pretty hard to fathom that this company has a smaller PE ratio right now than Cloudflare. And like, everybody's buying Nvidia right now. So that's just something to put it in your mind. Cloudflare has a lot of pressure on them to grow, because if they don't grow, their stock tanks. That's going to be a real problem, because if they cannot have consistent growing, they're going to truly have some like bad upcoming future. So he's saying right here that he really sees that he wants to put a lot of pressure on the sales team. And then we see the firing of a girl that worked there for 3 months. She didn't make any sales, so they said, hey, 3 months, no sales, you're out. She tried to ask him for examples and all this. They gave her nothing. And so what I think I'm seeing here is this is the culmination of intense management, is that if you have management that's saying you need to go out, you must meet these goals. And then we read articles where people are receiving really scummy and terrible emails, effectively tricking them into meetings with the sales team. This is what's I think is causing this whole thing. They have unreasonable expectations, so therefore their sales team has to go to unreasonable and really unethical attempts at creating sales. And Judo just said this: for those uninformed, PE implies that implies more than 20 or 25 years to recover total value company is considered poor investment according to fundamental analysis. For those that don't know what it is, price to earnings ratio. In other words, the price of the stock of the whole company versus how much they earn. So if it takes you 20 to 25 years for you to recuperate your current market value, that's probably, as he said, probably a pretty fundamentally bad investment. This is like 70 something. And this is obviously even worse. You know what I mean? PE doesn't mean much nowadays. It should mean something because a PE does mean something. PE effectively means the view of the institutional shareholder, because that's usually who drives a lot of the price, the institutional or individual shareholder of what they think the future holds for this company, right? That's what it effectively means. And so PE ratios mostly are now future-based profits. Anyways, we have a history of net losses and may not be able to achieve sustainable profitability in future. Yeah. We're dropping the 5th grade version here. Yeah, it's just a really simple way. It's future-based speculation of profits. Yeah, that's a better way of actually now reading PE ratios. But anyways, so this is just like how I look at Cloudflare is that I don't think they do not have an ethical approach. This is how I read it, of course. I may be wrong, but it seems like they don't have any sort of ethical restraints to their sales team. They have one single goal, which is to make sales. And so when that happens, it's the same thing as the paperclip problem. Have you ever heard the paperclip problem? Effectively, an AI's goal is to go and build as many paperclips as possible. So what ends up happening? It starts like consuming humans and trees and everything and the universe to make as many paperclips as possible because the only goal was to create paperclips. So if your only goal for this is to make sales, by the very nature, unethical things will end up happening because there is no other like sideline goals. Like, hey, make paperclips, but don't eat humans or trees. That prevents some level of problems, right? We harvest bones to make paperclips. Exactly. Clippy takes over the world. Game theory. Yes. In the simplest sense, it's just a bunch of game theory going on here. And so that's how I'm reading the Cloudflare situation. And my guess is that we're going to start seeing a lot more of this creeping out on Twitter. Now, whether or not Cloudflare is going to have any sort of repercussions for this, I have no idea. They may still be able to continue to increase their profits, make a lot of money, and keep on moving up the train, and eventually, hopefully, make themselves have some sort of like that their current stock price reflects the value that they're going to have. Like they're able to continue to grow 30% year over year for the next 5-10 years. And then they're like, yeah, see, we really were that valuable. Anyways, I think this is extremely interesting because this is really, I think, a telling thing. I also think that it's a really interesting thing that a company that had Fortune 500 customers that were able to have all these people jumping in and everything was going their way. They weren't looking at their company, right? When things were easy, they just didn't try hard. To me, what I read in this is that there isn't good management at Cloudflare. Because you know what? When times are good, you still want to hire great. Because there's no guarantee that next year times are going to be good. And so I think when they're having everything is going super duper good and everything just feels like they can't fail, they just didn't care. They didn't evaluate. They didn't identify. They didn't hire the right people. Because let's just pretend there are 100 people on their sales team that aren't actually good at being salespeople. Okay, well, you should have figured that out back then. Stop being complacent, right? It's crazy. They didn't plan for the storm. They didn't plan for the storm. As my mom always says, you hope for the best, plan for the worst. Anyways, my mom has a lot of good one-liners, and I really liked that one. To me, this just speaks more volumes of leadership there that I think is probably not great. The sales is the hardest thing to do. I wouldn't call it the hardest thing to do. There's plenty of really hard things, and it's really hard to compare hardness from one job type to another job type. Like, what's harder, sales or being a server? You know, like there's various aspects of being a server that's really difficult. That's not fun, and being also comparing what a server is doing versus what we're doing building stuff. There's things that are just significantly harder about being a server, and there's things that are hard about being a programmer. There's no it's really, really difficult to compare difficulty between things. Sales is really hard. I've done a lot of sales. Fun fact, I did outbound calls. Yeah, I was a telemarketer. and I was number one at the company. Number one. I was 16 years old. The average age was like 20 something, and I was number one. Number one. Okay? Because I could call and I could convince people. Granted, I probably didn't have a soul. I probably didn't have a soul at that point because, maybe I said statements that weren't necessarily the most honest and precise statements. Interesting times. The name is I think Cloudflare is in a very interesting place. And I think Cloudflare, we're going to see a lot of stuff over the course of the next while.